4th century, early Christians first used the term pagan to describe the people in the Roman Empire who practiced polytheism other than Judaism. Individuals fell into the pagan class either because they were increasingly rural or they were not soldiers of Christ.
As we start this examination of world religions, I'll begin with some of the dominant views in ancient times, some of which are still present today, but many of which have passed into history. We can call this session an overview of pagan beliefs, but first we must define the term. There are a variety of definitions offered. The first one is a people or community observing a polytheistic religion, often connected with animism. Second definition is a member of a religious, spiritual, or cultural community based on the worship of nature or the earth, a word we use nowadays, neo-pagan perhaps. A third definition focuses on an irreligious or hedonistic person. A fourth one says a pagan is simply an uncivilized or unenlightened person. What we will do is focus on that first definition, a polytheistic religion often connected with animism. Now, animism is the idea that all things, animate and inanimate, possess a spirit or an essence. It's a key feature in many ancient religions, especially of indigenous tribal cultures. It can be seen in different forms throughout major modern world religions. A couple of examples here of animism. In some Australian tribes, there is a strong, what they call totemist tradition. The totem is usually a plant or an animal that possesses supernatural powers, and it's reverenced as a symbol of the tribal community. The source of the spirit of the totem is a living plant or animal, not an inanimate object. Then there are the Inuit people of North America who believe that spirits can possess any entity, animate, inanimate, living, or dead. The spirit is not dependent on the plant or animal, but rather the entity is dependent on the spirit that inhabits it. So all spirits in this belief, human and non-human, are intertwined. Switching over to polytheism, it's the belief in many gods, each with its own functions who often take on human characteristics, particularly in ancient Greece and Rome. In other polytheistic cultures, such as in ancient Egypt, gods take on the form and characteristics of objects found in nature. That can include trees, animals, and even animal-human hybrids. The belief in multiple gods is probably the result of an earlier belief in vaguely defined spirits, demons, or other supernatural forces. However, in polytheism, these supernatural forces are given a sense of personhood and then organized into what we might call a cosmic family. The family of gods was used to explain natural phenomena and to establish a culture's role in the universe. Now, typically, the number of gods would expand as the culture's belief system developed, eventually resulting in what we might call a hierarchical system of deities. There were over 2,000 deities in the Egyptian pantheon, with the more famous ones becoming state deities. The gods evolved from an animistic belief system to one that gave human traits to non-human entities that were often endowed with magical powers. Let's go through a list of some of the most significant gods in Egyptian polytheism, where we will see how they associated each one with a particular function. We could start with Amun-Ra, the god of the sun and air that was worshipped as supreme king of the gods in some eras. Eventually became the most powerful god in Egypt, and his worship did border on monotheism. Then there was Anubis, the god of the dead associated with embalming, which was a specialized Egyptian practice referred to as mummification, as most people are familiar with. He was often depicted as a man with the head of a dog or a jackal carrying a staff. Then there's Astarte, a goddess worshipped in many of the ancient Mediterranean cultures as the goddess of fertility and sexuality, often closely equated with Aphrodite of the Greeks, Ishtar of Mesopotamia, often referred to as Queen of Heaven. Horus was a god in the form of a falcon who became one of the most important deities in ancient Egypt, associated with the sun, the sky, and power. His right eye supposedly was the sun, representing power, and his left eye was the moon, representing healing. Then there's Isis, the mother of Horus, possibly the most powerful and popular goddess in Egyptian history, associated with virtually every aspect of human life, and, in time, she became elevated to the position of supreme deity, also called Mother of the Gods, who cared for her fellow deities as she did for human beings. We have Ra, or Re, the sun god whose cult spread across Egypt and who was considered by many to have been the supreme Lord and Creator God who ruled over the land of the living and of the dead. Now, pharaohs often tried to connect themselves with Ra in their efforts to be seen as his earthly embodiment. Rulers of Egypt were regarded as incarnations of deity. They were accorded divine honors and worship. Egyptians believed their pharaoh to be the mediator between the gods and the world of men. After death, the pharaoh became divine, and then he passed on his sacred powers and position to the new pharaoh. That's Egypt. Let's turn now to Greece and the Greek family of gods. There have been many Greek gods mentioned across thousands of stories in Greek mythology, from the Olympian gods all the way down to many minor gods. The gods have very exaggerated personalities. They're plagued with personal flaws, negative emotions, despite their immortality and superhero-like powers. For instance, there's Zeus, the god of the sky, lightning, thunder, law, order, justice. He's the king of the gods. He's the father of gods and men. He's often pictured with a thunderbolt in his hand, and he resided on Mount Olympus, where he observed the affairs of men, punishing both evil and rewarding good. Then we have Apollo, a god of many things, perhaps of music, poetry, art, dance, oracles, archery, plague, medicine, sun, light, and knowledge. So he had a multifaceted function in the pantheon of gods. He was considered one of the most revered. There was an oracle at Delphi, a priestess who was believed to deliver messages from Apollo. Then we have Ares, who is the god of war, or the spirit of battle, who represented the physical, violent, and untamed aspect of war, in that he was considered the god of brutal warfare and slaughter. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, beauty, lust, pleasure, passion, and procreation. So this covers all forms of sexuality. Dionysus is the son of Zeus and the god of the grape harvest, winemaking and wine, religious ecstasy and theater, and even of a type of ritual frenzy or madness, and drunkenness is quite often associated with Dionysus. Then there was Poseidon, a brother of Zeus, god of the sea, earthquakes, storms, who could be considered as the most disruptive of all the ancient Greek gods, potentially. Athena, the favorite daughter of Zeus, was the goddess of war, handicraft, and wisdom. Now, notice how sometimes the deity's functions seem to overlap, as well as the protector of Athens. And so when we turn to the Roman gods, what we see primarily is a copy of the Greek gods, but just simply with different names. We have Jupiter, or Jove. He's the king of the gods, the god of the sky and rain, kind of like the Roman Zeus now. The planets in our solar system all take Roman names. And these Roman names are better known than their Greek counterparts since we use them for the planets. Mars, the god of war, like Ares. Venus, the Roman Aphrodite. Bacchus, simply the Roman version of Dionysus. Neptune, god of the sea, was the new name for Poseidon. The worship of the Roman emperor as a divine being began in the eastern provinces. It was recognized by the emperors Augustus and Tiberius, and then promoted by their successors more as a political measure, because such a cult is useful now politically for the Romans as a unifying force for the empire. Another European example of paganism would be the Norse gods that dominated that culture until the introduction of Christianity. Now, some of those Norse gods have been resurrected, so to speak, in Western culture lately, especially through movies. Odin was head of the Norse gods. He was associated with war, poetry, wisdom, magic, and death. Slain warriors would join him in Valhalla, where they live blissfully in a splendid palace under Odin's care. Thor, the god of thunder, storm god, also of strength. He's depicted as wielding a giant hammer, which most people are familiar with. He's heroic, a defender of humanity, battling giants and other monsters. Loki was the shape-shifting trickster who was unpredictable, amoral, actually rather nihilistic, which means he believes pretty much in nothing. One source actually describes him as only a nominal member of the gods, who demonstrates a complete lack of concern for the well-being of his fellow gods. We have Balder, the son of Odin, a favorite of the gods, the god of beauty, innocence, peace, and rebirth. He was killed indirectly by Loki, who tricked Balder's blind brother, Hoder, into killing him with a spear of mistletoe, the only thing, apparently, that could hurt him. I've mentioned C.S. Lewis in the previous session. Again, I'm going to go back to him. The influence of Norse religion on Lewis when he was very young was rather large. He said the following: "If the northernness seemed then a bigger thing than my religion, that may partly have been because my attitude toward it contained elements which my religion ought to have contained and did not. It was not itself a new religion," Lewis says, "for it contained no trace of belief and imposed no duties. Yet unless I'm greatly mistaken, there was in it something very like adoration." Lewis goes on to say, "We are taught in the prayer book to give thanks to God for his great glory, as if we owed him more thanks for being what he necessarily is than any particular benefit that he confers upon us." Lewis kind of concludes, he says, "I came far nearer to feeling this about the Norse gods whom I disbelieved in than I had ever done about the true God while I believed." And he finishes by saying, "Sometimes I can almost think that I was sent back to the false gods there to acquire some capacity for worship against the day when the true God should recall me to himself." Now, some of the pagan religions had a much darker side. One prime example would be the Aztecs, a civilization that reigned in Mexico and discovered by Europeans when the Spanish came to the New World. The Aztecs say that the gods built a huge fire, and then two of them threw themselves into the flames, from which one emerged as the sun and the other as the moon. Then the sun refused to move unless the other gods gave him their blood. They were compelled to sacrifice themselves to feed the sun. Now, the Aztecs viewed the universe as unstable. Death and destruction continually threatened it, and blood was needed to make the sun move across the sky. So the blood was shed in a human sacrifice ritual that offered a victim's heart. This was considered a sacred duty to the sun. Without sacrifice, the world would come to an end. Lewis continues his commentary on pagan religions by saying this. He says, "Christians and pagans had much more in common with each other than either has with a post-Christian. The gap between those who worship different gods is not so wide as that between those who worship and those who do not." Now, this session has focused on a variety of pagan religious beliefs. The next session will concentrate on one religion only, and that's Hinduism. What do Hindus believe, and what are the ramifications of those beliefs?